Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer quick match gameplay. This time around I am playing as Bretonnia against the Wood Elves led by the Anarchist Führer on the map, the Devastation of Ostermark. And yeah, let's see how things break down. This Wood Elf build, or this Bretonnia build. So right off the bat, I'm taking some immediate fire from my opponent's Vanguard force. And I'm going to pause it for a second because the action starts almost immediately, basically. So I decided to run Bordeleaux again, and the main reason I ran Bordeleaux is because he does have that AoE speed boost, so I figured it'll allow him as well as any units that might be near him. So for example, Knights of the Lionhearted or my Knights of the Realm, I can kind of have him hover over him and make him go a little faster. Originally I was thinking about running Pegasus Knights to kind of try to run the Elves down, because I assumed they would bring some skirmish units, so I definitely needed some cavalry to shut them down, because Bretonnian skirmishers aren't going to be able to contest. And if they're running stealth units, then your trebuchets won't really be able to track them. So, but I'll break in. He is coming in, of course, with Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught. I forget what this one's called. The Rally. There we go. Because it's basically just a small leadership boost, or actually significant leadership boost for a short amount of time. Heroic Killing Blow for extra damage, and of course Spirit of the Tempest, which is a bonus to charge bonus, and 10 speed. Alongside him is a Damsel on a or Damsel of Life on a horse, and she's of course coming in with Earthblood and Wellish Blow, basically the standard run-of-the-mill shtick there. Then for my front line, I'm running all men-at-arms with shields. These guys are all veteraned up a little bit, up to veteran C2, which will give them a little bit more staying power. More importantly, these guys have silver shields, which will allow me to absorb any Elvish missile fire and just kind of tank it out, hopefully. And they will trade fairly effectively with, say, Eternal Guard or War Dancers with Azrai Spears, and they'll even do okay against, for example, Dryad. They're not amazing at it. They certainly won't win, but they'll do an okay job. And they'll shield my main damaging force against the Wood Elves, which is these 3 units of Battle Pilgrims, and in the very back, the Holy Wardens of La Maison. These guys do cause fire and magical damage, which bypass the physical resistance and often get into what is often fire vulnerability for the Wood Elves. Take advantage of that. And then these Battle Pilgrims will trade very effectively with practically anything the Wood Elves can bring, especially given their fairly cheap cost. They only cost 600, which is very solid. They are, of course, backed up by a Grail Relic here in the center, which boost their leadership, and more importantly, to provide them with immunity to fear and terror, or psychology, because Bretonnians have huge issues with that, and Wood Elves can actually bring a pretty decent amount of fear and terror. Out on the flanks, I do have 2 units of men-at-arms with polearms. They are fairly far back because I don't want them getting shot up. These guys are very susceptible to ranged fire. They're not close enough to the Grail Relic to really get that leadership buff, so if my opponent focuses on them, they will fall apart very quickly and simply break. And I kind of need them to shut down enemy Treekin, since the only other units I really have to beat them off are my archers and maybe the cavalry. Which brings me to my final infantry portion of the contingent, which is 2 units of peasant bows with fire arrows. These guys, of course, of course they'll be good against any units that are fire vulnerable that the elves might bring. But even if the Wood Elf does bring, say, the Firebark Elders, as long as I don't focus on the Firebark Elders, these guys will still actually do more damage than normal peasant bows. They have 25 missile damage rather than 20, and so they'll still perform fairly well. Unfortunately, their leadership is pretty atrocious, so I can't count on them sticking around if they start taking fire, but they can definitely contribute a bit damage-wise. And finally, out on the flanks, on one flank I do have the Knights of the Realm, Shock Cav, Anti-Large. These guys will trade fairly effectively with, say, Wild Riders, and they'll be able to beat up on Treekin a little bit. And on the other flank, it's basically the same thing, except it's Knights of the Lionhearted. These guys have magical damage, so they'll be able to bypass the physical resistance on Treekin, for example. And that's really one of the main units I'm bringing these guys against, is Treekin. And they'll still trade fairly effectively with Wild Riders. So right off the bat, my opponent is opening fire. You can see he's brought a fairly conventional build, but he did have this cheeky Vanguard force composed of the Hawkeyes of Drakira, which are, of course, the Regiment of Renown Way Watchers with Smoke Bomb and Discourage. And these guys are immediately firing on me, and that is, of course, going to tank the morale of these men-at-arms. They are bodyguarded here by a unit of Wild Riders, and Wild Riders are, of course, very powerful cavalry, especially given their cost. They are a bit light on the armor, but they dish out a lot of hurt despite not being armor-piercing, because they do have, of course, a Frenzy. They, of course, have a physical resistance. And they have psychological immunity. They're just a very strong unit in general. They cause fear, all that sort of stuff. And that's actually one of the cool things about the Knights of the Lionhearted. They also cause fear, and they do have an encourage bonus, which I know the Bretonnian Cav has. For my opponent, he brought, otherwise, besides those 2 Vanguard units, he brought Ryan, who has become more and more popular choice with the advent of the Cloak of Isha buffs coming in with Bombardment spells, Foe Seeker, and Cloak of Isha, of course. Alongside a front line mostly composed of Eternal Guard with shields. These guys, as well as one unit of Winterheart Guard, but these guys will do fairly well against Bretonnian infantry. They're not ideal for it, in my opinion. If you really want to trash Bretonnian infantry, Dryads are generally better because they have much more DPS. But these guys do have shields, so they'll be resistant to skirmishing fire. And unlike Dryads, they'll do very well against Bretonnian cavalry, which Bretonnia will usually bring at least a little bit of. And they can also do well against Bretonnian flying lords. Of course, Winterheart Guard are unbreakable, so they'll hold their ground for an eternity, and they have charge defense against all, so I won't get much charge bonus out of my Battle Pilgrims. Behind them, he has 3 units of War Dancers with Azrai Spears. Actually, never mind. One of his diseases is the Warden's Citadel. I didn't actually notice this initially. These are so War Dancers with Azrai Spears. Lorax Tricksters, which are the Regiment of Renown. War Dancers with Azrai Spears. They can boost their damage or attack and give themselves stealth and movement speed bonuses, which makes them pretty ridiculous. They can definitely dish out a lot of hurt. And here in the center, War Dancers of Citadel. These guys do provide armor sundering, and they're basically super Eternal Guard is what it comes down to. And if I brought, for example, Foot Squires, these guys would definitely debuff them and make them very vulnerable. And then finally, out here on the flanks, 2 units of Glade Guard just to kind of pepper down my infantry, and a unit of Hawk Riders up in the air to skirmish with me and kind of harass me. So seeing these archers up here, I charged up with my Knights of the Lion-Hearted, thinking that the only thing up there was the Hawkeyes. I turned out to be wrong and get plowed into by the Wild Riders. The Wild Riders, after the initial shock damage, which is in my favor, do start kind of drawing the fight closer. They do have Frenzy, of course, so initially they'll be doing well. And unfortunately, I definitely had the Winds of Magic for it, but I didn't cast an Earth's Blood on these guys, and that could have easily saved me several models on this unit. And unfortunately, I simply didn't do that, and it's going to cost me about half, almost exactly half the unit. These Hawkeyes are still kind of picking off my troops, or trying to kind of shoot them down. So I kind of give up on chasing them, and I turn around and back off, having shattered these Wild Riders. Or initially they're broken, but they will shortly shatter. There you go. Over here, the Hawk Riders do try to harass, but I have my archers ready to go. My peasant bows do push forward and start sniping those guys down. And now I did try to shuffle my Knights of the Realm over to the other flank to help, but it's a little too late. And so now we've kind of backed off and regrouping, and I'm regrouping my cavalry contingent there. My opponent, in the meantime, is shuffling over his Lorax Tricksters to engage in case my cavalry gets cheeky and tries to pursue. And now I see my opponent's army. I have a decent guess of most of what he's bringing, though these Glade Riders are actually in the ditch and I can't see them. But otherwise, I do have a good idea of what he's brought, so I'm just trying to kind of push forward with my infantry force, fairly confident that I can out-trade him in a straight-up fight. Because Battle Pilgrims against Eternal Guard is a fairly favorable matchup for the Battle Pilgrims. Over here, my opponent has decided that he's going to push forward a little bit, so we are engaging in this bit of a choke point, which is not ideal for me, given that I do outnumber my opponent. Being able to flank would probably be, it would be a good option for me. Or you can see some of my peasant archers are firing against the Eternal Guard, but peasant archers are inaccurate, and these guys have silver shields, so they're gonna be able to mitigate the damage at least a little bit. Over here, these men-at-arms with shields are getting torn apart by the Hawkeyes of Jakir, who of course are debuffing their morale. The Eternal Guard do push into the men-at-arms, and you can see the men-at-arms are actually not doing terrible, even though they did charge in debuffed. They're actually doing okay. So the men-at-arms are kind of piling in, and I get a lovely Dwellers Below over here on this Glade Guard, and the War Dancers, who I didn't even see initially, until my units were all the way up here. And my opponent actually doesn't move out of the way, so he's going to take the full brunt of the damage here, and his Glade Guard is being kind of messed up by whatever's left of my skirmishers. Over here, I did kind of try to sally forth with my cavalry. I see the Lorax Tricksters, and I decide that discretion is the better part of valor, and I'm going to simply back off. In the meantime, this frontline engagement is kind of breaking down. I'm still unsure if my opponent had any large units hidden anywhere, so I'm not committing my polearms just yet, but I'm allowing my peasants to kind of keep firing on my opponent's backline, try to shut down that Glade Guard. Over here, I'm simply backing off, having no interest in charging into the Lorax Tricksters because they will shred Knights of the Realm very, very easily. And you can see over here some of the men-at-arms have broken, and that's largely coming down to the fact that they've been under arrow fire, and their morale, and the Grail Relique wasn't close to at least this unit here on the right. But now the polearms are pushing in. It's kind of my last reserve here. At this point, I'm fairly confident that my opponent didn't bring any other units. And you can see over here, my opponent's trying to kind of pepper down poor Albrecht, doing quite a bit of hurt. And for some reason he pops Smoke Bomb. I'm not entirely sure why, but in turn I'm trying to pepper down his Way Watchers with the Peasant Bowmen with fire arrows, who are doing a decent amount of hurt. These guys do 25 damage per shot, or 25 damage per 10 seconds. It might not be 25 per shot. 24 per shot actually. So they're definitely dishing out a decent amount of hurt. And meantime, Albrecht just kind of backs off, and I shift my peasant bows to fire on the Hawk Riders because I'm figuring that these Hawkeyes of Jakira will shortly be out of ammo, and it's kind of a waste to try to keep peppering them down. Over here, unfortunately, I do lose track of these men-at-arms. In the meantime, though, I'm microing my cavalry on the flank. That was a really bad arrow, but trying to get into my opponent's back line. All the while, poor Albrecht over here is just getting shot at and being hurt a lot. But over here, the Hawk Riders are definitely not going unmolested, and because my opponent didn't bring any sort of lures of magic to help him, he's definitely going to suffer for it. The Loic Strictures have in the meantime committed themselves to shoring up this my right flank, my opponent's left flank, and I've dove into the back of these Eternal Guard and terrified him off with Bordeleaux. My opponent has dove into my backline with Hawk Riders, and I don't really feel like committing any units to come out with these guys up, so I do send a Damsel of Life in there to try to melee him a little bit, as all while peppering him down with these Peasant Bowmen. And you can see the Peasants actually fall apart pretty quickly under the attack from the Hawk Riders. They definitely don't perform too well against them. But the Hawk Riders are routed off by the arrow fire. Over here, I do charge. Last second, I changed the Knights of the Realm into Lance Formation, plow through the back of my opponent's Loic Strictures here, and then I just try to push through, out through my infantry and onto the other side over here. In the meantime, I've kind of run over these Eternal Guard, and now with the help of Bordeleaux, I'm pushing into the Hawkeyes of Jakira, all while this front line is kind of slowly but surely swinging in my favor. The Winterheart Guard are starting to lose models, the Wardens of Citadel are as well. Of course, they're still dishing out a lot of hurt. These two regiments of Renown have very high defense stats, and these guys don't have the best of melee attacks, so it's going to take them a while to pepper them down. In the meantime, my archers have shifted focus onto Orion. Orion has very low armor. A lot of his survival, he does have some bonus against, some defense bonus, 20% missile resistance, but he's still going to be very susceptible to ranged fire. And you can see he's actually melting even to the fairly inaccurate and inept peasant bows. So Bordeleaux and the Cavgoon squad over here have plowed into Orion and are just trying to pick him apart. In the meantime, my opponent's last units here are folding. The Wardens of Citadel have actually routed off, and my opponent does decide to end the game right there. So definitely a bit of a fun match. I think it was a fairly solid Bretonnia build. I definitely made a very early mistake of not casting Earthblood on the Knights of the Lionhearted, which meant I lost about half the unit for practically definitely for gain. I slaughtered the Wild Riders, but not for it wasn't as good of an engagement as I could have had it. My opponent tried to forward deploy with the Hawkeyes of Jakira, and it ended up costing him his Wild Riders. He might have been better off trying to set up a flank and then engaging. Once I had already engaged his front line, peppering down some of my backline high priority targets. Definitely got ruined by those dwellers below, which hit a double unit of Grave Guard and just melted him down, or Glade Guard, and one of the War Dancers actually, and just destroyed him. Eternal Guard, as you can see, didn't trade that effectively. The vanilla Eternal Guard didn't trade that well with the Men-at-Arms and Shields. When you compare the kill count, some of these Men-at-Arms have practically the same kills as these Eternal Guard. And they are significantly cheaper. They're 200 points cheaper. The Pole-Armors did very little, but they kind of got committed fairly late into the fight, and when they did, it was against War Dancers, for most War Dancers instead of the high value targets my opponent had, so their low attack kind of let them down there. Battle Pilgrims, though, dishing out a fair amount of hurt. Holy Wardens of my Santal doing a decent amount, and Peasant Bowmen did absolutely amazing damage. Most importantly, though, Knights of the Lionhearted over here just kind of dished out immense amounts of work. These guys did really well. So yeah, a bit of a fun game. For my opponent, you can see his Loic Strictures and the Wardens of Citadel. Really, his regiments of Renown performed very well, but his vanilla units kind of didn't do as well. Orion is also better utilized in melee. He does cause terror, which not all of my troops today were supported by the Grail Relic. And something I see people do fairly often with Orion when I play against them is that they leave him on a range stance and they just have him like throwing spears. That's not a good use of Orion. Orion's much better as a melee combatant. Those spears are more of a backup weapon that if you need to snipe down some large target or kind of pick at enemy lords once Orion's really badly beat up and you're trying to just regen HP, that sort of stuff, then you can use him. He's his ranged fire is just a support tool, kind of like his spells are. And his main mode really should be melee. And if my opponent had pushed him into the right flank there against my handful of Men-at-Arms and Battle Pilgrims and Pole-Armors, he might have been able to terror route him and break a flank open, which would have then resulted in my infantry getting pincered and possibly slaughtered. He could have possibly gotten to my Grail Relic or my Lore of Life Damsel and kind of massacred him, while Bordeleaux and the Cav were still sitting up on the high ground. So definitely something that could have been done differently there, I think. But definitely a good game to my opponent here. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War, Quick Match, or anything like that. Any recommendations for what units you'd like to see demonstrated or comps you'd like to see demonstrated, be sure to post those down below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Wyvern out.